My name is Rowan Vale, 35 years old. I work as an industrial air conditioner repairman. It's a job no one likes, but it pays the bills on time. My wife, Mara, 33, is a night nurse. My son Theo is 8, hyperactive, loves to make up stories so much that sometimes I wonder if he's joking or not. We bought this house because it was incredibly cheap. I didn't ask why, I didn't want to know why. At the time, having a roof over our heads was more important than anything else. The day I moved in, I immediately noticed the kitchen. Moldy cabinets, yellow sink, cracked tiles. The clock on the wall ticked slowly. I thought it would be fixed in a few days. As I packed, I joked with Mara, "The house is old, but it's definitely in good condition. Just don't worry." She looked around and shook her head. "It's so cold here." The first night, we spread out our mattresses in the living room. Around 10 o'clock, the neighbor knocked on the door. She was thin, with white hair, and her voice was so low I had to strain to hear. "Don't leave the back door open at night." I smiled awkwardly, thinking she was just afraid of the draft. At about 3:03 a.m., Mara's phone rang. At that moment, the kitchen light turned on. Not flickering, not dim, but straight on, clean, clear, as if someone was standing there pressing the switch. I lay stiff. Mara opened her eyes and grimaced. "Turn it off. I'm so tired." "I didn't touch it," I replied, my voice dry and stuck in my throat. Then came the smell, heavy, fatty, moist, like something just boiled, and mixed with a sweet, metallic taste. It made my throat constrict, my tongue prickle. I immediately remembered the smell of warm blood from my cut hand in the workshop, the smell mixed with grease. I turned on the hallway light and went downstairs. The kitchen was empty, no pots or pans, but the countertop was warm. I put my hand on it, hot as if a stew pot had just been lifted off it. There was a greasy, round mark on the wood, a dark red border. I pulled my hand back and wiped it on my pants, my heart pounding. "Rowan." Mara stood in the doorway, her hair tangled, her eyes half open. I swallowed. "No one but this." I pointed to the red mark on the countertop. She frowned, silently, pulling me out of there. The next morning, I unplugged the switch to check. The wiring was normal. I told myself, old house, broken wiring, nothing. But when I washed my hands, I still felt sticky on my fingertips, as if I hadn't washed off everything I'd touched last night. The second night, I locked the back door and checked all the locks. I also placed a basin of water at the kitchen door, my mother's old trick, believing that water could prevent something from entering. I wasn't superstitious, but I wasn't reassured either. 3:03 a.m., the kitchen light was on, but this time, it wasn't just the light. I clearly heard the knock, knock, knock sound, small, steady, coming from the kitchen, the familiar sound of a knife hitting a cutting board. I trembled, but still went downstairs. And I was stunned. There were 3 bowls and 3 pairs of chopsticks on the table. The bowl drawer on the shelf was missing exactly 3. I touched the table, feeling hot as if someone had just left. Mara followed, her voice trembling. "Did you make it?" "I never touched it." I swear, my eyes never leaving the 3 bowls. We stood there, clearly hearing the knife still knock knock somewhere. But the table was empty. The cutting board was empty. I felt a chill down my spine. On the 3rd night, I decided to install a small camera in the kitchen. I didn't tell Theo, just said the sensor light was broken. I left my phone connected all the time. When the clock jumped to 3:03, the kitchen light turned on again. The smell of stewed meat wafted out so strong that I had to gag. I didn't dare watch it right away, waiting until morning. The video almost made me collapse. 3:03, the light turned on. On the empty table, bowls and chopsticks appeared. Then 3 people appeared. I held my breath when I realized it was me, Mara, and Theo. The 3 of us sat upright, picking up food from the empty table, chewing, laughing. I remember clearly, that night I lay next to Theo. The watch on my hand recorded 0 steps during that time. But in the video, I was eating. What was even more terrifying, the me in the video lifted up, lips moving the sentence that would haunt me forever. "I don't want to swallow anymore." I turned off the phone, sweat pouring down the back of my neck. At that moment, I knew for sure this kitchen was more than just a short circuit of electricity. more than just a place for dishes and chopsticks to be placed on its own. It wanted to drag my entire family into a meal. That was not for humans. After 3 nights in a row, I knew I could no longer call this accidental, and any excuses about electrical short circuits or imagination would be untenable. I decided to try. I bought a cheap door alarm and attached it to the kitchen door. I also covered the edge of the door with a roll of masking tape and took a picture of it. Finally, I tied a thin thread around my wrist, threaded the other end through the crack in the door, and tied it to the leg of the kitchen table. If I actually got out of bed, the thread would stretch and break. Mara watched me prepare, her face full of tension. "You think this will work? At least we'll know who's coming in." She was silent, not asking any more questions. I didn't say anything more because I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer myself. That night, I lay waiting, my eyes fixed on the clock. The ticking of the second hand continued to ring out steadily, but each minute felt like an hour. Mara lay curled up, Theo fast asleep in the next room. I gritted my teeth trying to stay awake. 2:59 a.m. I tightened the thread on my wrist, my palms sweating. 3:01 a.m. The room was so quiet I could hear my heart. 3:03 a.m. The bell didn't ring, the tape didn't come off, but the kitchen light came on. At the same time, I felt the thread on my hand loosen, as if someone had gently untied it from my wrist. My skin was cold. A second later, it tightened again, tied tighter, neater than before. I sat up, my heart about to explode. Mara jumped, whispering, "Do you smell it?" Yes, that smell. Stewed meat, heavy, sweet, like the pressure cooker lid had just been opened. I felt nauseous, my throat was tight. I ran downstairs. The alarm was still intact. The tape was still stuck. But the dining table, had 3 bowls and 3 pairs of chopsticks. In the middle of the table this time, there was a large, shiny streak, the red border darker, dotted with tiny fibers like flesh. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking as I took a picture. In the light, the screen was clearer than the naked eye, each fine grain like a stretched muscle. My throat choked. I swallowed until it was dry. Suddenly, I heard the sound of a chair being dragged on the tiled floor. Clearly, slowly, right next to the dining table. But the chairs were still neatly arranged. I stood there, stunned, not daring to breathe. From the stairs, Theo rubbed his eyes, his voice sleepy. "Dad, why does it smell like dinner?" I swallowed, trying to keep my voice calm. "It's nothing. Go back to sleep." But I knew I was lying to my son for the first time since I entered this house. The next morning, I turned on the camera to check. 3:03, the lights were on. I clearly saw me, Mara, and Theo sitting around the table. Unlike the previous times, this time we were not just eating. In the video, I turned my head to look straight at the camera, my blurry face showing a stiff, distorted smile. I threw my phone on the table, my heart pounding. Mara picked it up, watched until that part, then dropped it to the ground. Her face was pale. "Rowan, if it's not us, then who is it?" I couldn't answer. All I knew was this kitchen was no longer just automatic. It was looking back at us. I began to obsess over the kitchen. During the day at work, I found my hands still shaking when I remembered the video of me staring straight into the camera. I didn't dare say much to Mara, but I knew she couldn't sleep either. Her eyes were dark, and none of us dared to enter the kitchen after midnight. The next morning, when Mara took Theo to school, I stayed behind, deciding to search the kitchen. I took out each drawer, opened each cupboard. Every drawer was old and moldy, nothing unusual. But when I tapped on the tile next to the stove, the sound was strange, hollow. I took a knife and tried to pry it open. After a few minutes, a piece of ceramic tile popped out. Behind it was a hidden drawer. Inside, I found an old cleaver, its blade rusted, and the handle still had dark stains. Next to it was a cracked wooden cutting board, its surface marked with dozens of deep, dark cuts. I paused, feeling as if I had just dug up a human bone. There was also a stack of old newspapers. The paper yellowed, the cover smeared with grease. I opened it and saw only news about disappearances from more than 10 years ago. Every page had a red circle around the words, "Last seen near Hawthorne Street." In the corner was a line scrawled in pencil: "Last party, salvation." I sat down on the floor, sweating despite the bright sky. My hands were shaking so much that I almost dropped the stack of newspapers. I knew this was no longer a haunted old house story. This was the trace of a real person, someone who had lived here, who had done something in this kitchen. That afternoon, when Mara came home, I showed it to her. Her face paled, her hands clasped over her head. "Rowan, if this has something to do with the disappearance, then what if—" I interrupted. "I know, but we need to be sure." That night, I tried again. I set up the camera at 3 different angles, one facing the dining table, one facing the stove, and one facing the back door. I also drew a cross on the kitchen floor with charcoal, right where the table was, so I would know if anyone moved. At exactly 3:03 a.m., the lights turned on again. The smell of meat was so strong that I felt nauseous, and I had to cover my mouth so as not to wake Theo. I forced myself to sit still and not run downstairs. The next morning, I turned on the video. The overhead shot showed the dining table. At exactly 3:03, bowls and chopsticks appeared. Then 3 blurry figures, me, Mara, Theo, sat down. But this time, when I sat down, I saw clearly. The table leg moved a little, pressing against the exact cross I had drawn. The exclamation mark disappeared, replaced by a dark red streak that spread like fresh blood that had just dripped down. Mara held the screen with trembling hands. "We can't stay here anymore." I didn't say anything, but in my mind, there was only one sentence. If we leave, this secret will follow us. After finding the secret drawer, I couldn't ignore it anymore. This kitchen had clearly witnessed something terrible. I started searching the internet and local records. I typed in Hawthorne Street and the word missing. The results weren't many, but they were enough to give me goosebumps. In 2009, a mass disappearance was recorded. 5 friends went to a party, then no one returned. The article said the police didn't find a crime scene, only unusual cooking traces in a house in Hawthorne, and then the case was dropped. The homeowner, a man named Victor Hale, disappeared shortly after. I read it aloud to Mara. She held her head. Her eyes red. "Rowan, don't tell me the house I bought is that place." I didn't answer, but in my head I already knew the answer. I decided to search the kitchen more thoroughly. I removed the lid of the old oven, which was covered in a thick layer of dust and ash. But on the inside I saw black, circular burns, like the bottom of a large pot that had burned over. When I touched it, a fine layer of powder fell down, reddish-brown like blood that had dried for many years. I jerked my hand back, feeling like I was touching human ash. That night I tried something stupid. I left the kitchen door unlocked, no rope, no traps. I wanted to see what would happen if I left everything natural. At exactly 3:03, the lights turned on. The smell of meat filled the house, so strong that I thought it was sticking to my hair, my clothes. I sneaked down the stairs, hid behind the door, and looked into the kitchen, and I saw a dining table set for 6 people. 6 bowls, 6 pairs of chopsticks, 6 neatly pulled chairs. But there were only 3 of us in the house. The empty chairs still made a creaking sound, as if someone had sat down. I could clearly hear the sound of chopsticks, the sound of chewing and swallowing, and small laughter, but there was no sign of anyone other than my family in the air. Mara stood behind me, shaking and holding my hand. "Rowan, did you hear that?" I nodded, my throat dry. We looked at each other, then back at the dining table. On the opposite chair, the empty chair moved slightly closer to the table, and I heard a low, hoarse voice, as if coming from the wall itself. "The party is not full yet." Mara almost screamed. I had to cover her mouth. I pulled her and Theo up to the room and locked the door. That night, we sat huddled on the bed. No one dared to come down again. In the morning, the dining table was empty, but on the wooden surface were 6 faint circular marks, like the bottom of a warm bowl. I touched them, they were still hot. I knew for sure, this kitchen was not just reenacting someone's death. It was waiting for more people, and sooner or later it would drag us to the full table of 6. After the night of the 6-seat dinner, I knew I had to find real evidence. I searched the house more thoroughly, especially around the kitchen. When I removed the paneling under the cupboard, I pulled out an old tin box. Inside was a worn leather notebook, heavy with the smell of dampness and smoke. 2 words were scrawled on the cover: Last Supper. I turned to the first page. The handwriting was scribbled but legible. Human flesh keeps the soul from melting. A feast of 6 blood will save. I swallowed, my hand shaking so much I almost tore the page. Mara stood behind me, reading as she backed away. Rowan, this is proof. The previous owners killed them in this very kitchen. I nodded, but my eyes didn't leave the page. The next pages were filled with diary entries, dates, names, and menus. I read a passage. May 12, Sarah, tender meat, sweet taste. July 2nd, Marcus, strong smell, but stewed with red wine is fine. I had to sit down on the chair, sweat pouring down my back. For a moment I felt that this kitchen was not empty but was watching me, as if every word in the notebook had just been written down at that moment. That night we tried to sleep, but at exactly 3:03, the kitchen light came on. Not only the smell of meat, but this time there was also a soft laugh coming from the dining table. I was shaking, decided to go down to see. Mara held my hand. Are you crazy? It wants you. But I took her hand away. If we don't know what it wants, we can't escape. I went down. The dining table was still set with 6 seats. But unlike every other time, on each bowl was a piece of dark red meat. Not like beef, not like pork. The meat was shiny, the muscles were taut as if it was still alive. I backed away, my stomach churning. At that moment, the chair opposite me moved, creaking. The air was cold. I could see clearly there was a dent in the chair as if someone had just sat on it. But my eyes saw no one. A hoarse voice rang out right next to my ear, but no one was standing next to it. Sit down, Rowan. The party needs 6. I screamed, backing towards the stairs. Mara ran down, pulling my hand. But before we could run, I turned back, and I saw a blurry figure sitting in the empty chair, face blurred, but mouth wide open as if smiling. On the video camera, I watched the scene the next morning. My heart sank. It wasn't just that blurry figure. The camera recorded us, all 3, sitting down, picking up pieces of meat, putting them in our mouths, chewing, and laughing. But I swear, I remember clearly that night I just stood on the stairs, not touching the table. As I slowed down, I saw the me in the video look up, eyes dark, staring straight into the lens. And my voice rang out through the speaker. Only 3 more people left. The feast will be complete. After watching the We Eat Meat video, I couldn't believe my own memory anymore. I woke up to see grease stains on my fingers. Mara swore she slept the whole time, but the next morning, I saw a reddish-brown stain on her shirt that looked like splattered broth. It was worse. My normally hyperactive 8-year-old son now sat staring out the kitchen door every morning. One day he asked, Dad, what did we eat last night? I remember it was delicious, but why can't I see anything in the fridge? I stood there stunned. Mara and I glanced at each other. No one answered. That night, I decided not to sleep. I sat on the living room sofa, my eyes glued to the camera screen. Mara was next to me, her hands shaking as she held a cup of coffee. 3:02, the house was silent. 3:03, the kitchen light was on. I saw it clearly on the screen. The bowls and chopsticks were laid out, the dark red meat in each bowl. Then the camera was very grainy. When the image came back, I almost dropped my phone. It was no longer just a blur. On the screen was Mara and I, clear, sharp, sitting at the dining table, picking up meat and bringing it to our mouths. I looked to the side. Mara was still sitting right next to me, eyes wide open, staring at the screen. Rowan, that's not you, right? Her voice was broken. I didn't answer. I stared straight at the image of me in the video, and me in the video turned her head, smiled, chewed slowly. Red meat smeared around the corners of her mouth. We panicked. I rushed to the kitchen, turned on the lights, but the dining table was empty. No bowls and chopsticks. Only the strong stench clung to the walls, to her hair, to her skin. Mara sank to the floor, holding her head and crying. I pulled her up, but at that moment, Theo's voice came from the stairs. sleepy but clear. "Dad, why did we eat so little today?" I turned around and saw the boy standing on the steps, a dark red stain on the corner of his mouth. I trembled and wiped it away. The thing on my hand was sticky, thick, and smelled of fresh blood. I screamed, picked him up, dragged Mara into the bedroom, and locked the door. That night, none of us could sleep. In the morning, I found a small piece of bone on the dining table, pale white, smooth. Not like a chicken or a pork bone, Sansan. I picked it up, my hands shaking, and threw it straight into the trash. But the smell still clung to my finger, and no matter how many times I washed it, it wouldn't go away. At that moment, I knew we were no longer in control. The kitchen was forcing my family into the feast, little by little, and it wouldn't stop until we were 6. I could no longer bear living in the dark. Every morning when I woke up, the fishy smell still lingered in my hair and clothes. My son asked questions like, "What did we eat yesterday?" And I had no idea how to answer. I decided to find the root. I returned to the leather notebook I found in the kitchen. I read each page, each word carefully. Near the end, there was a scribbled, hard-to-read paragraph, but I managed to piece it together. 3:03. That was the hour when blood first flowed onto the kitchen floor. 6 people, 1 table. Eat to keep the soul, cook to bind. Whoever enters this kitchen will become a guest. I sat there, stunned. 3:03 was no coincidence. That was the time Victor Hale killed his first victim right in this kitchen. That hour became a milestone, and every night it repeated itself, recreating the last feast to imprison the souls he murdered. Mara stood behind me, her voice trembling. "Rowan, does that mean we've been counted as guests at the table?" I nodded, my eyes stinging. "Yes, anyone who lives in this house is dragged in. It doesn't need my consent. It sees me as its next guest." We compared the old newspapers. 5 disappearances, 5 names, 5 people Victor cooked into a feast. But the table always had 6 seats, which meant 1 was missing. We were both silent. The thought was clear. 6 seats weren't just to recall the past. It wanted 6 people living in the present to complete Hale's ritual. That night, I tried one last thing. I sat in the kitchen, right on the empty chair. In front of me was the empty wooden table, but the smell of meat had already begun to seep in. I looked straight into the camera, wanting to prove I was sober. 3:03. The lights were on. In an instant, the chairs around me creaked automatically. The air was thick and cold. In front of me, on the wooden table, bowls and chopsticks appeared. 6 bowls, 6 pairs of chopsticks. In each bowl, there was a piece of dark red meat dripping with juice. Then I heard a hoarse voice, close to my ear, but no one could see. "You're already sitting, Rowan. From now on, you belong to this table." I jumped up, throwing my chair over, but the dining table was still lit. The 6 bowls were still there. Mara ran down, hugged me. We both saw clearly the banquet had accepted me. When I replayed the video the next morning, the scene took my breath away. In the frame, I was not only sitting, but also bending down, picking up a piece of meat and putting it in my mouth. Chewing slowly, blood dripping from the corner of my lips, I screamed, "That's not me! I remember standing up!" Mara looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. "Rowan, maybe you ate, and you don't remember." I couldn't argue. The kitchen had chosen me. It had my place at the table. I knew I didn't have much time left. After the night of being forced to sit at the table, I still felt a fishy taste in my throat, like dried blood stuck to the back of my tongue. Although I didn't remember eating, my body did. Mara was scared, unable to sleep continuously. Theo was even worse. He started whispering to someone in his dreams, saying things like, "There's only one more person missing, right?" I knew if I left it any longer, the kitchen would swallow the whole family. I decided, either destroy it or we die at this table. I prepared gasoline, matches, and a sledgehammer. Mara protested, her voice cracking. "Rowan, if you burn it, if it spreads, we'll die too." I replied, my eyes fixed on the kitchen. At least it won't have another party. That night, at exactly 2:50, I went down to the kitchen. I poured gasoline all over the table, soaking every grain of wood, every crack. I placed the sledgehammer on the table, my hands shaking. Mara hugged Theo, standing at the door, her eyes desperate. 3:03. The lights turned on. The air was immediately thick with the smell of cooking meat. 6 chairs creaked, moving to the table. On the table, bowls and chopsticks and pieces of dark red meat appeared. And 5 blurry figures sat down, their faces broken, empty, but their eyes glowing like hot coals. The empty chair was the one I was standing in front of. A hoarse voice echoed from the walls, from the floor, from the air. "Sit down, Rowan. Eat. The feast will be enough. No one can destroy it." I roared, swung the hammer, and slammed it straight down on the table. There was a crack sound, and the table cracked open. From the crack came a stream of black smoke and a putrid smell, making me vomit. The figures screamed, each face distorted and howling in pain. I lit a match and threw it down. The gasoline burst into flames. The blue flames rose fiercely, engulfing the dining table, chairs, and bowls. Laughter and screams mixed together, echoing throughout the house. Mara shouted, "Rowan! Run!" I pulled her and Theo to rush out the back door. The flames swirled. The whole kitchen lit up like a furnace of hell. I heard a hoarse voice roar one last time. "You will never escape. Whoever sits down will always be a guest at the table." Then the roof exploded. I dragged my wife and children out, falling face down in the backyard. When I returned, the kitchen was engulfed in red flames, the windows were shattered, and the light looked out like a demon's eye. The next morning, the house was a pile of ashes. The police came and recorded fire due to an electrical short circuit. No one believed me. No one knew that night I had heard the soul screaming in the fire. We moved away to another state, but now every time the clock ticks to 3:03, I still feel a tightness in my chest, a metallic taste in my mouth. In the mirror, I sometimes see the corners of my lips, a red, as if I've just swallowed something. Oh, I understand. Some houses are never just surprisingly cheap. The walls hold memories, and the kitchen holds the blood of the past. If there's anything I want to say to anyone who hears this story, never underestimate the kitchen of an old house, because it might still be waiting for enough room for an unfinished party.